Welcome back. I am so thrilled you're here today because we are diving into an absolute masterclass in high-stakes global diplomacy. In this explainer, we are breaking down the monumental May 2026 Trump-Xi Beijing summit. It's literally been almost a decade since a U.S. president visited China, and the geopolitical chessboard is completely transformed since then. We're talking two superpowers, shifting alliances, and massive economic consequences, all playing out in real time.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We've got a fast-paced docket today, covering 5 main pillars: the high-stakes Beijing summit, leverage and the Iran war, the ultimate flashpoint of Taiwan, the AI and tech race, and finally, trade and rare earths.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, the high-stakes Beijing summit.
You know, just the logistics of getting these two leaders in the same room was a turbulent journey in itself. After an initial meeting at the Busan summit back in October 2025, they had a planned April date that was completely scrapped. Why? Well, the outbreak of the Iran war in March forced a massive delay. Finally, in May 2026, the U.S. delegation touched down in Beijing. It is a stark reminder that bilateral diplomacy just doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It is entirely at the mercy of global stability.
And picture this. While Trump and Xi are meeting at the Great Hall of the People, other global players are watching from the sidelines with serious anxiety. The European Union and Japan are terrified of this concept taking shape, what's known as a global G2. This is basically the idea of a world order where the US and China form a pure duopoly, just dividing global power right down the middle between themselves. For secondary nations, the immense fear is that they'll be reduced to a sort of tributary status, just forced to navigate a landscape where Washington and Beijing call all the shots.
Moving right along to Section 2, leverage and the Iran war.
And this brilliantly illustrates the immediate leverage at play here. You really cannot separate this summit from the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. It is the ultimate bargaining chip. The United States urgently needs Chinese restraint to stop advanced surface-to-air missile sales to the Iranian military. Meanwhile, China holds a very distinct advantage, watching vital U.S. military resources and attention heavily drain away from the Pacific to deal with the Middle East. Analysts note this gave Beijing a massive upper hand heading into these talks.
But actually, the U.S. delegation did score a crucial pre-summit victory. Before Air Force One even landed, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who remarkably made the trip, making him the absolute first defense secretary to accompany a president to China since 1972, secured high-level assurances from Beijing. China agreed to halt those specific weapons transfers to Iran. This breakthrough was absolutely vital in even getting both parties to the table.
Which brings us to Section 3, the ultimate flashpoint, Taiwan.
State media reported a very stark warning delivered directly by Xi Jinping. Notice the specific language used here. He stated that the Taiwan question is the most important issue in the relationship, explicitly warning that if mishandled, the two nations could come into conflict, pushing the entire relationship into a highly perilous situation. The absolute gravity of that language cannot be overstated. It really underscores the immense existential stakes of this diplomatic tightrope. In fact, right before the summit, China's embassy to the U.S. publicly outlined their strict boundaries, literally calling them the 4 red lines that must not be challenged. They are the Taiwan question, democracy and human rights, paths and political systems, and China's right to development. This just shows the incredibly rigid framework Beijing established going into these talks. They are simply areas where they preemptively declared zero room for compromise.
All right, shifting gears to Section 4, the AI and tech race.
President Trump did not come to Beijing alone. He brought immense corporate weight with him. The delegation included an unprecedented roster of U.S. CEOs. We're talking Tim Cook of Apple, Elon Musk of Tesla, and Jensen Huang of NVIDIA. And what is incredibly fascinating here is that Huang wasn't even on the initial list. He actually flew up to Alaska just to hitch a ride on Air Force One with Trump and Musk. It perfectly captures just how critical the tech sector is to this entire bilateral relationship.
So, it sets up this fascinating paradox for us to consider. Can these two superpowers actually cooperate on AI safety while they are simultaneously locked in a bitter AI arms race? Well, the reality is, they kind of have to. Both nations face a mutual threat: malicious non-state actors using highly advanced AI to launch cyber attacks or develop biological weapons. They share a massive, common interest in preventing this technology from falling into the wrong hands.
So what do the practical steps look like? Experts suggest 3 pragmatic measures that don't require either nation to compromise their competitive edge. First, establishing non-binding safety guidelines for frontier AI models. Second, sharing limited, specific information about AI threats, like the prompts or behavioral patterns of bad actors. And third, opening a direct AI emergency hotline to prevent catastrophic miscalculations during a live cyber or biological crisis.
But of course, this tech Cold War is causing massive collateral damage. Remember the EU watching anxiously from the sidelines earlier? Yeah, they are feeling the squeeze. European companies are currently caught in a brutal crossfire. On one side, they face heavy U.S. sanctions on the export of chip manufacturing equipment. On the other side, if they comply with those U.S. sanctions, they face severe penalties from 2 new Chinese laws designed to punish that exact compliance. It is the ultimate lose-lose situation for secondary players in this tech tug-of-war.
And finally, Section 5, Trade and Rare Earths. Now, what's really interesting is how these massive geopolitical shifts directly hit the wallet. The sheer scale of this number is truly staggering, $520 billion. That is the value of cargo that has been transported by the China-Europe Railway Express. To reassure partners, Chinese state media was heavily highlighting this figure during the summit. It beautifully illustrates China's shifting strategy, moving its vast export machine away from vulnerable sea lands and heavily relying on secure overland rail networks.
A huge piece of the trade puzzle is the November 2025 Rare Earths Agreement, which a U.S. official confirmed is still in effect. The U.S. agreed to a 10% tariff reduction on Chinese goods. In exchange, China suspended new export controls on rare earths. However, there's immense suspense right now, because while China's global exports of rare earth magnets have steadily risen, shipments specifically bound for the U.S. have actually declined. And there is a massive ticking clock hanging over this entire arrangement. By January 2027, new U.S. procurement regulations will kick in that entirely prohibit Chinese-sourced rare earths from U.S. defense supply chains. This looming deadline threatens to upend global supply entirely if alternative sources aren't scaled up immediately.
And why should we care about all this? Because this high-level macro diplomacy directly translates to microeconomics. Rare earths are absolutely essential for permanent magnets in our tech. If that Chinese supply tap tightens, everyday Americans are going to face hardware cost inflation. We're talking rising prices for electric vehicle batteries, surging costs for the GPUs needed for crypto mining and advanced computing, and broader tech inflation across the board. Your next smartphone or car is directly tied to the outcome of these summit negotiations.
Yet, diplomacy is always full of surprises. Right in the middle of the summit, Beijing offered a sudden goodwill gesture, the renewal of export licenses for over 400 U.S. beef processing plants. These had been lapsed for over a year, and their sudden renewal was a very clear signal of willingness to keep at least some agricultural trade flowing smoothly amidst all the tension.
Which leaves us with this final critical thought. As these two superpowers carve up the global chessboard, dividing leverage over Taiwan, AI, and rare earths, will this fragile, extended truce actually hold? Or are everyday Americans, European companies, and secondary nations destined to pay the price of this new world order? It's a fascinating dynamic, and we'll be watching every move closely. Thanks for learning with me today in this explainer. I'll see you next time.